Hi, I'm Charna Parkey. I'm the real-time AI product and strategy leader at DataStax. And here with me, I have Bryan as the VP of strategy at DataStax with a long history of working with business and technology leaders on digital transformation and AI strategy. It's really good to have you here. I'm very excited about this conversation.
Glad to be here.
Let's start with you. So I know that you've been thinking deeply lately about challenges and risks in this space, the agent space, the AI space, the generative AI space. And we were talking to our CEO the other day, and we know that he's talked about how we believe we reach our best future of AI for all fastest if the right people who want to do the right things in the right way can learn by doing. So, how can we mitigate those risks and manage challenges when so many people are working on AI?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think, it's worth thinking about this in the context of the opportunity, the risks and the challenges and the precedent we have, right? So if you think about smartphones, about 85% penetration worldwide with smartphones, right?
Yeah.
There's no reason why AI won't be 100% worldwide and certainly in everybody's organization, right? So if you didn't
Mhm.
start to think about that, you kind of back into, look, AI will redefine industries. Where
Yeah.
your company sits will depend on what you do with AI. We know it's going to be part of everybody's job, both doing their own work and serving their internal, external customers. So the
Mhm.
sooner you embrace that and say, yes, it's 100% of everybody's job, then you start to think about how do you do that safely? How do you do that right? And I think one pillar we think about is openness, right? Being
Mhm.
explicit. This is the journey we're on. It's all part of our jobs, and we're all learning how to do it. And I think there's a couple angles on that. One is we all know the pain of technical debt if we've been around in technology. You've
Yeah.
got the chance not just to avoid technical debt as you start off on this journey by doing it right, but use AI to document every meeting. Create the
Uh,
body of knowledge in text, in data about all the questions people ask. What harm could we do? How would
mhm.
we know? What level of trust are we trying to achieve? What would have to be true to achieve that? You're actually creating a body of knowledge you can point AI at, right? The
Yeah.
faster you proceed by learning by doing carefully, cautiously, you actually
Mhm.
build this possibility of an AI agent to help people do AI organization with your context, with your customers, in the geographies you operate, that's
Right.
bespoke to you. And then I think, so many people working on it then gets back again to openness. Ensure everybody feels like they can do their work in the open, right?
Yeah.
Including surfacing a question of, we're not sure how to achieve this level of trust, right? We don't know how we would detect this type of harm. And then it shouldn't go it alone in your organization, and your organization shouldn't go it alone, right? Like wherever vertical you're in, you probably lean into understanding, trends in consumer marketing and participate maybe in an academic body or,
Mhm.
trends in financial regulation, and you go to those bodies and you've got experts. Do the same for AI, right? In each
Right.
company, but also each function, each vertical, or each line of business. Lean into picking up the phone or engaging with folks. I
Yeah.
think, we all see, and I mean we, meaning business, government, academia, we all see the potential. If you reach out to talk about what you want to do with AI as an organization, people
Mhm.
will probably be very interested in talking to you.
Yeah, that is definitely, I mean, in my experience recently, been the case. Anytime I've reached out to want to talk about it, people are engaging. We're all learning this together. And so, but the topics, like some of the words you just used, safety and trustworthiness, it seems like those are key where, we have to, there are feelings we're trying to evoke, right? Feelings of
Yes.
safety, feelings of trust. So how do we sort of ensure we're building for safety and for trust versus kind of doing it after the fact?
Yes, absolutely. And I think, two other things I think about a lot are the sense of being mission driven and
Mhm.
context aware. And so, every time you're going to deploy an AI, you are entailing some risk, right?
Yeah.
The return will be higher for those things that really deliver on your brand promise, that connect to what customers really want from you, right?
Mm,
So first off is thinking about what's going to give us the highest return for the level of risk we take, right? And sort of lean into what do folks really value from us, right?
yeah.
And the second is you're going to do best probably at what you know well, right? So stay aware of the context. Are you reaching outside of the context where you've got good customer knowledge and intimacy and domain expertise? Probably not the first AIs you want to deploy, right? Figure out how you can enrich or extend what you know well, which
Hmm.
will then, if you learn how to deliver safe, trustworthy experiences in a space that's defined and scoped, the
Hmm.
tools you learn, the techniques you learn, right, the ways to measure and monitor you learn will probably build your skills on, okay, maybe we're now going to extend into more foreign territory, but the foreign territory shouldn't be your first foray.
Right. That makes sense. So if we're putting this in context then for our audience, most folks today are practitioners or architects. What are some maybe more concrete actions they can take that can help?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, the bottom line is as a technical practitioner, an architect, your organization can't do this without you, can't succeed at safety and trust without you. Your skills are critical, but also cross-functional teams is already an established pattern for success. And I think becomes even more important when you think about generative AI, where this probabilistic interaction, with the end user, right? Lots
Mm,
of things start to matter, everything from, their brand perception of you to their age, to their reading level, to, cultural nuances. And so as a technologist, a service you can do not only to your organization, but to yourself is to really emphasize that the path to success for this type of application is a diverse team, a cross-functional team, is, making rustling with or chasing down the qualitative dimensions of things just a first order task, and not something we figured out how to deploy a capability, let's sort of shoehorn it in to what we think will work. Like, no, build from the customer, build from that emotion you want to create. And of course, at the end of the day, the prize for this is, obviously losing trust is bad, but the
mhm.
prize is if you build trust, people will be willing to share that much more data with you over time,
Right,
which, is the route to competitive advantage.
right, right, exactly. And I mean, as practitioners, we all want more data for all of those answers we're trying to come up with and getting a more complete picture of, our users and things like that.
Right. On that note, I know there's actually a body of knowledge under the cognitive handle of responsible AI that you
Mhm.
are extremely well versed in and do a lot of thinking about. And I think it's important to surface that you don't have to reinvent the wheel here.
Yeah.
You should stand on the shoulders of giants. So you tell me a little about, how would you express your point of view on responsible AI and what that means to folks who are listening?
Yeah, I mean, we may have heard about this in several different ways over the last couple of years, right? It may be responsibility or ethics or transparency, accountability. They're all kind of interconnected and they can't really exist in a vacuum. Basically, anything that we do with AI is going to impact people and process and technology. I tend to think about this instead of about, AI, like just responsibility in general, because what we're trying to do is drive behavior change, some change in some outcomes. So it means that we have to consider the people, the behaviors trying to drive, and the ethics of that in the products that we're making intended to create change. So for me, part of ensuring something is ethical, since there are no real like objective values, is this consumable communication to the reader. Some of what you were talking about earlier, where it's not just that you can willy-nilly make someone go do something that you want them to do. That is not ethical if it's not aligned with their intention, or their goal or some of their values in some way. And so like you said, we can stand on the shoulders of giants here and look into things like behavioral psychology, like products that create change. There are a lot of books out there that we can read about this behavior change. I mean, I think most of us, well, I'm dating myself. Most of us remember like when like using cigarettes and different things in movies were banned
Yes.
unless, right, we made it look cool, but the impact
Right.
of the sort of promoting this was that people were like, oh, I'm cool, but they're not thinking about like it caused me death, that sort of a thing. So we
Right.
have to be careful with AI in that regard as well.
Are there a couple examples that you would cite about, what it means to build responsibly?
Yeah, I mean, I like to think kind of responsible and irresponsible. And so
Hmm.
irresponsible examples are a little easier for me to kind of pull out. So, um, and maybe I could just negate them as we're talking. So I would find it irresponsible, especially in AI, if you didn't provide some sort of feedback loop, right? AI is learning from the data and learning from different outcomes. And so if you're not providing any mechanisms for closing that feedback loop, like you're keeping your idea of someone or the state of the world constant, there's no change, that would be irresponsible. We know, I mean, just look at how things are so rapidly changing. We know language changes over time. We know that who a person is doesn't equate to sort of like credit rights or things like that. We don't know how things are going to change, and we don't know what kind of concepts we're using today that should not be codified. So it would be very irresponsible to keep sort of that feedback loop broken.
Yeah, and
Um,
I love that example because if you think about however let's call it a manipulative system to stay in the
yeah.
irresponsible zone, however effective it is today, if it's not a learning system, it may become less effective. And now obviously the win-win is you're not manipulative, but you are a learning system, and you kind of miss the boat if you're not a learning system.
Yeah, yeah. And I think part of this openness that you were talking about before also applies to telling the end user about how you're updating this data, how you're updating the model. So you have to communicate the assumptions that you took when you built the model, the motivations that you had in order to like change the behavior. This idea of trust, it doesn't come with secrecy, right? I don't
Yes.
know. Like we can think about just like teaching our children how to trust other people. Like it comes from 100,000 little interactions so that
Mhm.
we can kind of build this up over time. And that's going to be with communication. That's just,
Yes. Yeah,
yeah,
and I think in the moment we're in, it's actually pretty fascinating. I think you're hitting on something which people should lean into because, in the past, lots of folks weren't really aware of how AI was working in the background. But
yeah.
now, because of generative AI, because AI will be in every Microsoft Office or every Google app,
Hmm.
your customers will understand that they're interacting with AI, and you can actually disclose this information, and they'll get it, right? And
Yeah.
that's an opportunity, really. So to bring this back to the final question you asked me, what advice do you have for the practitioners and architects in our audience?
Yeah. I think in general, when I think of responsibility, it's a shared framework. We all have some responsibility in this. Our users, our builders, the providers of the technology, collectors and providers of data. There's some level of responsibility. And similar to what you were saying, I would encourage the practitioners to understand where do they sit in terms of what they're accountable for and who they're accountable to. If you're building something that's going to impact an end user, are you building in mechanisms for communicating the risks to the user that's associated with using the content that's being generated with your app, or maybe that what your application may prevent them from doing? You
Mm,
know, what
mhm.
are you communicating and how are you letting that sort of come out in your end user experience as you're building? But also part of what you're doing by exposing this information and building in a more transparent and open way is you're enabling your end users to take part in their own responsibility as part of this shared responsibility model, right? So, there are ways to do this, whether it's, terms of service is not the way that you're going to communicate this to your end user. You need these simple experiences that are understandable, that allow a user to know, like, hey, I just saw this friend recommendation. maybe you have a little pop-up that said, where did this recommendation come from? Or how did it get here? Letting them opt in and out of different components of your experience and application. So
Yes.
I would, yeah, mostly encourage like individualize, put yourself in that ecosystem
Yes.
of shared trust and
Yes.
responsibility.
And I love the scoping and the contextualization because, we've got these models now that we can interact with and have a conversation about anything. That's
Yeah,
not why your customers come to you,
right.
right? They don't come for some generic, all-encompassing thing. They come for something specific where you can hone in on, oh, a great feedback mechanism for this specific interaction is this.
Mhm.
Because they're not here to chat about all things under the sun.
Right. I mean, that brings us to the practical example that we were using earlier in the earlier sessions. We saw a demo of an AI agent that DataStax built. And so maybe we should go into some of the considerations that they had and learnings from that experience to kind of help contextualize this to, the agent we did.
Sounds great.
So yeah, so I think the first thing when I spoke with the team that they were considering is, like you said, what's the customer experience? What part of our brand and what part of our business requirements are actually going into this agent? Because we knew that our agents had to be as effective as our current support and sales teams, right? Our current
Right.
human chat is critical in go to market. Like we are a developer community. Like all of our products are open source. And so everything we do, it's critical that we are having that communication experience. And so when we were thinking about like what the requirements are, chat was going to be a very important part of the brand experience as
Yes.
sort of that primary interaction. Um,
Yes.
from a business perspective, it's going to impact net promoter score and other things like that.
Right.
But
Right.
also, as we were thinking about that, we were thinking like, okay, well, what are the mitigation steps we need to take?
Mhm.
And to your point earlier, we had to like limit the audience first. We needed to
Mhm.
run tests. We only deployed the first assistant to like a small percentage of our audience. And we put in some checks there, right? We had human review. So we're still working on this and we're going
Yes.
to experiment with the agent. But the human part of that loop we're keeping intact
Yes.
because we need to kind of like as we expand outside of chat to writing emails and other multimodal agents, we need this sort of expert review to make sure that the audience that we're speaking to and the brand as it's being represented is still within what's acceptable to us.
Yes, absolutely. And I think, there's a human side of cross-functional teams as a pattern for success, but there's another side which is, no one goes it alone. That includes the AIs. Right.
Yes.
There's just no AI that doesn't have a steward, a shepherd on an ongoing basis. Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I know like you were thinking about privacy and PII. So, when you were
Yes.
thinking about that with this application, what kind of things did we hit there?
Yeah, I mean, so I think the support is very interesting because as a SaaS company, cloud company, we've of course got all kinds of operational data.
Mhm.
We've got data about the customers. The customers are communicating data about their situation in the support chat, and so you really have to think about isolating users
Mhm.
and in even also putting boundaries around what type of user information winds up getting into the system. So
Yeah.
no PAI, anonymizing names. You don't want to create traces of individual users that can be identified in the data set you're building, right?
Yeah.
And you have to and one of the things I love about the system we're building is, of course, Apache Cassandra, DataStax Astra can be used to give an LLM memory essentially,
Right.
but you need to scope that context that you're using that user's history,
Yeah.
and exclusively that user's history to provide context. And so I think the team did a pretty thoughtful job about building the boundaries and boundary conditions around all that.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And I know that there was quite a bit of work around the sort of feature engineering side of that, right? Because you're trying to summarize, this user's experience
Yeah.
and history, but also contextualize it into what have people at this stage of their journey done in the past. And
Yes.
so that's kind
Right.
of a, like you're saying, anonymization, but also engineering the right features to provide context was incredibly important.
Yes. Right.
Yeah.
Yes. Absolutely. But for all the engineering we did, as you mentioned, humans are still in the loop in a couple different ways. And we've got, I think, both some automated triggers
Mhm.
and some human interventions in terms of sentiment and escalation. Can you t talk about that a little
Yeah.
bit?
Yeah. So, part of what we knew, like I said before, is that that human experience is very important. And we needed to be able to know when was the right moment to escalate to a human
Mm.
if a user has like said something negative to the chatbot. Now, certainly sometimes users are going to just play with the bot and see like what's going on, right? But the difference between I think a bot and an agent is an agent knows when to escalate. They've looked at the sentiment of what's
Yes.
happening. They've sort of seen a journey in there and they're like, I can't handle this anymore, right? It's sort of this
Yes.
idea we talked about where it's like an agent can act on your behalf a lot,
Yes.
but they can't do everything, right? They kind of know when to give it back to you.
Yes.
And we also had a little bit of intent detection in there as well. So if there was started to be questions around not just like how do I use this product, how do I get unblocked, but around like pricing and how would I actually put this
Ah,
into other things, then we would bring them to an expert in that area because
yes.
that's not what this agent was trained on, right? They were trained on
Yes.
how to assist, not how to sell. So, we put
Yes.
other kinds of triggers in
Right.
there too.
That's actually a really wonderful example about respecting user intent, which is we're not actually trying to use this interaction to persuade
Yes.
someone who's not here to buy. But if they wind
Mhm.
up coming through this channel and that's what they're trying to do, right, we
Right.
will quickly connect them to the right resource, which I think is
Right.
a great example of, the opposite of manipulative. It's respecting and detecting if they're in the wrong place and helping them out.
Right. Right. And any business, if you're trying to manipulate someone to buy something and it's not actually something they need, like you're going to lose that business. You don't
Yes.
want that kind of negative
Right.
brand experience. So consider consider not doing that.
Yes.
So hallucinations, we hear a lot about them. Everyone's afraid of them. It's a really hard problem. I know we're always working on it. How have we been handling it today?
I think there's, a lot of, prompt engineering and prompt testing. And I think there's also the humans come into play, right? Because we are actually devoting human time and effort to reviewing and tagging hallucinations, right?
Yeah. I think there was a whole team in the beginning who was
Mm.
doing this, and now we can sort of escalate the more likely hallucinations. But yeah, it's such a hard problem. And I'm sure, the industry is going to find better and better ways to do this. But the point of generative AI is to create new content. And
Mhm.
so you have to be pretty careful about what is real, what's
Yes.
actually, coming from your support
Yes.
docs versus something that's like, it'd be cool if we had this, but we don't actually have that feature today. Please don't
Yes.
tell end users about it.
Right, right, right. But this I think ties back to, yes, hallucinations are a risk of learning by doing, but by
Mhm.
learning by doing responsibly and diligently, you start to understand the interaction of, your particular data and the domain and what types of hallucinations get produced and how you can detect and prevent them. And so, as generic tools and general purpose tools evolve in the ecosystem, you'll also have a leg up on kind of understanding, you know, how do hallucinations surface in our context?
Yeah.
And that's better to have done that by learning by doing, and including investing in some human, oversight time than to
Yeah.
start out from square zero, down the road.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I know that we're about out of time. We had a few other points we were going to talk about around response format and relevancy and testing and metrics. Maybe we do that in it's shorter than what we wanted to because we got a little deep in some of these things.
Sure.
I'll just like give a few points. So you don't just need to get an out of the box, right? We knew that we had to tune various things like temperature, like the degree of randomness versus a varied an unexpected response and mistakes and nonsense, et cetera, like you can tune these different settings between 0 and 1. There were other things that we had too, like EK values, P values, different prompt settings that controlled the dispersion in the content and the creativity of the answers. And so when you tell a prompt, like you should only answer a customer questions about Cassandra DataStax and its products, that means that the user isn't going to be able to ask irrelevant questions that are not pertaining to what this agent's expertise is. And so we definitely considered putting some of those guardrails on. And I know this is going to just continue as we start to make these specialized agents across our product experience. Well,
Absolutely,
with
that makes sense.
yeah, with that, any last remarks, Bryan, before we let everyone go?
No, it's just been a pleasure talking to you, and I hope folks take away that, there's work to be done, there's caution that you need to be take, but it is doable, right? And you
Right.
can start to think about use cases and agents, and again, learn by doing, documenting, and the doing being the shepherding and management after the fact as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks so much. We'll see you guys next time.
Take care. Thank you.